Film has come so far over the past 100 plus years, so let's take a look at just how far. Way back in 1878, the world's first motion picture was made by a man named Edward Muybridge. By definition, a motion picture is a series of pictures projected onto a screen, creating the illusion of movement. Now, by the 1800s, humans had discovered photography, projection and motion, but no one had managed to put them all together until he did. He set up 12 cameras linked to tripwires to take photos of a horse galloping. He developed and later projected the images onto a screen using a device of his own invention, the zoopraxiscope, an early device displaying moving images and considered a predecessor of what we know nowadays as the movie projector. Just 10 years after that, in 1888, the world's first movie was made. It showed actual consecutive action and is called the Roundhay Garden scene. It may only be 2.11 seconds long, but it is still considered the world's first actual movie. Films remained silent until the early 1900s, but decades passed before sound motion pictures were commercially practical. This was due to synchronization being difficult to achieve with early sound-on-disc systems. This is a process using a phonograph, which later became the gramophone and then a record player, to record or play back sound in sync with the motion picture. Innovations in sound on film led to the first commercial screening of short motion pictures using the technology, which took place in 1923. At first, the sound films, which included synchronised dialogue known as talking pictures or talkies, were exclusively short films. The earliest feature-length movies with recorded sound included only music and effects. The first feature film originally presented as a talkie was The Jazz Singer, released in October 1927. It was a major hit. It was made with the Vitaphone, which was at the time the leading brand of sound-on-disc technology. Sound on film, however, would soon become the standard for talking pictures. By the early 1930s, the talkies were a global phenomenon. In the United States, they helped secure Hollywood's position as one of the world's most powerful cultural and commercial centres of influence. In Europe, the new development was treated with suspicion by many filmmakers and critics who worried that a focus on dialogue would subvert the unique aesthetic virtues of sound cinema. In Japan, where the popular film tradition integrated silent movie and live vocal performance, talking pictures were slow to take root. Conversely, in India, sound was the transformative element that led to the rapid expansion of the nation's film industry.
There's 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead. Nothing but blue skies from now on. You like that, Mama? I'm glad of it.
If we then go a few years backwards, we'll have the first use of animation. Historically and technically, the first ever animated film was Humorous Phases of Funny Faces in 1906, made by Stuart Blackton. Although this was only considered a short, and many consider Walt Disney's 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs the first ever animated feature film, though at least 7 films were released earlier. However, Disney's film was the first one completely made using hand-drawn animation. Jump forward again to November 22nd, 1995, when Toy Story was released in theatres, becoming the first entirely computer-animated feature-length film, which was a huge success. It started a chain reaction and became the first of many motion pictures solely relying on animation and CGI due to the uncountable number of kids' cartoons and movies. If we then jump forward by 40 years to the 1970s, we have the first use of computer-generated images, CGI. It was only 2D at the time when it was first used in 1973's Westworld, but then in 1976 in Future World it was upgraded to 3D. Just years later, throughout the 1980s, CGI was used in some classics such as Back to the Future, The Terminator, Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Empire Strikes Back, Die Hard, The Shining, Blade Runner and Return of the Jedi. These films hold a place in people's hearts and memories as some of the greatest films ever made, and comparing them to films nowadays, they still keep up, but what is it about those older films that people prefer to the newer films nowadays, with fight scenes you can only imagine, in places you can only dream of, with giant real-looking dinosaurs or monsters or superheroes, which is odd because you'd think the newer something is and the better the cameras, the better the editing software and the better technology, the better that everything looks and how crisp it is. You'd think the films would improve on the previous ones made, but no, people still prefer some of the oldies and the classics, so why is that? Do you believe that film is better now than it was before?
I think I'd probably say I prefer older films, mainly because now films have got more of a scope to be better, and a lot of the time they don't actually reach their potential. like in the old days, more films were brought out and they were good because they were original and stuff. And most of modern cinema is just a rehash of something old, and it's usually awful. Like there's never usually anything good that comes out of new films. It's like the MCU, like the Marvel films, have been like a good example of original films that, yes, they've been based off comics, but they're not like a remake, and they actually are usually good. They're the only kind of films that meet the standards that they set every time. Like most films that come out, it's going to be hit or miss. People are spending money on a film that could be absolutely awful because I think people are getting lazy.
How do you think films can be improved in the future?
I think people need to kind of stop overdoing everything. Like, I feel like there's too much demand for action and everything, and I feel like most of the films that come out today that I prefer are like quite slow, but then have like massive sequences. Like for example, like Dunkirk. Like yes, it is full of action, but there's also some kind of like story-based like parts of the film as well. So I feel like if films want to go back to like how they used to be, they need to kind of tell stories a bit better while still including all the action and stuff.
Do you think the heavy use of CGI nowadays in films takes away from the core elements of film, such as the storytelling, because it tries to focus too much on just putting big sequences in there and making it look pretty and aesthetically pleasing?
I think it's not always the case, because you know some films do need that CGI. Like something, I mean, you're never gonna get like certain things to look real enough because they're just not real, which is obviously the reason people watch films, to take away from the normality and to like put themselves in someone else's shoes. I think CGI could be done better. Like big productions, like need to improve CGI, because some like CGI is really bad for things that are coming out like in 2018, where anyone can pick up a computer and probably try to do some CGI of their own. But I don't think it's taking it away from the cinema, because you still have films like The Shape of Water, which obviously won Oscars, where all of them, like, there was not really much CGI, and like the alien thing from that was like mainly makeup. So I feel like CGI is not really ruining anything, and if anything, it just makes things look a bit better.
Do you think film is better than it was in the 20th century?
No, but I don't think it's worse either. I think, you know, each sort of decade has like phenomenal films come out. So, you know, the techniques and technologies are probably a little more refined now and a little bit better. And the possibilities of filming new stories in new environments is better and sort of more available to studios. But I think the quality of films is as good as it has ever been.
How do you think film can be improved on in the future?
I think as the world changes and sort of new demographics appear, I mean, it's just having a wider all-round sort of understanding of that, and different people's stories, different people's understandings. I think the world's a lot more of an acceptable place now for people to be individual and themselves. So I think that will, in a way, sort of breed new stories and new story makers and new story ideas.
Do you think the heavy use of CGI nowadays in films can end up taking away from the core elements of the storytelling?
I think it can do. I think there can be style over substance for sure, but I also think, you know, films like Avengers and you know, even something like Rogue One, where you sort of bringing back actors from the dead, it sort of gives new opportunities to, you know, to sort of filmmakers as well. So I think it can be really sort of good for a film as well. You know, even something like The Wolf of Wall Street, the amount of CGI that's involved in that film, which is, you know, a real life setting, it's lots of sort of, you know, tutorial videos and sort of inspiration videos online, which you can see just how much CGI is used now in areas you wouldn't necessarily think it would be, to the benefit of the film.
Do you personally prefer older or newer films?
I don't have a preference personally. I think I have, you know, films that I love from the 1920s as much as I love, you know, films that I love from like the 2010s. So no preference really. Just if it's a good film, it's a good film.
Films are just as great as they were, if not better now, because there is so much more potential due to the huge advancement in technology, allowing so many more creative stories for us to get lost in. Those classic films will always have a place in everyone's hearts, but we must look forward to the positive future of film, and who knows where it will take us next.